Hey everyone, it's Raven here and welcome to my second tutorial video. Today we're going to be talking about starting deployments, and really starting deployments are one of the most important aspects of the multiplayer in Wargame, and I think they're also pretty neglected in terms of the other video tutorials you might see or just general advice for newer players. And I think part of that is just because there's a lot of different opinions on what makes a balanced starting force and what your opening deployment should be. And I respect that. I really need to have a disclaimer in this video that says anything I tell you here isn't necessarily the right way or the only way to do things, and good people can differ on this, and just kind of keep that in mind. And certainly there's no such thing as a one-size-fits-all deployment, and you can't take exactly what I show you in this video and use it every time and expect to win. At least not win all the time. But anyways, really, I want to point out that if you think about it, along with deck building, starting deployments is really or they're really the two first challenges you encounter when you are trying to win a multiplayer game. If you don't come with a good, well-balanced deck, then you're probably going to lose, and if you don't start your forces well in the beginning phases of the game, you're also probably not going to do very well. And so that's why I'm making this video, and I hope to, I guess, pass on some of my ideas and some of my knowledge here. So let's get right to it. In your average game, 2v2, 3v3, generally each player starts with 1,000 starting points, as you can see up here. And of that 1,000 starting points, it's important to remember that you don't have all of that available to you. You always have to start with at least one CV, so even if you have the cheapest CV, as I do, that's 100 points for a Jeep CV. Suddenly you only have 900. If you start with a fob like most people do, then that's down even less to 825. And so at this point you need to think, well, I really need to put guys on the front line. So if I'm going to Echo and Hotel, I need to have forces here. If I'm going to Foxtrot, I need to be here. If you go to Golf, you need to be in here. And you really, you want to think about your starting deployments in those terms, and that you want as many boots on the ground as possible. So if you call in an extra CV, if you call in a luxury plane, it really reduces the amount of forces you can actually have to go to your zone and contest your territory. So for that reason, I tend to not like to start with extra CVs or planes unless I have a real and immediate need for the plane at the beginning of a match. For example, if I'm going to go to Echo and I want to napalm this area right here to stop the people, or maybe right here to stop people coming to the city, then yeah, that might be worth spending 100 points. Or likewise, if it's a 4v4 and we have enough people to cover all these areas, then maybe I'll buy an ASF at the start to hit enemy napalm and just have that strategic option to benefit the whole team. But generally in Wargame, you're by yourself on a lane, so to speak. Here or at Foxtrot or over at Delta and Golf, and you really have to be self-sufficient to some extent or another. And so that's why I say you don't want the extra planes, you don't want the bells and whistles. You really need to focus on as many boots on the ground as possible, go into your zone to capture it and get the most advantageous ground possible. It'll hopefully benefit you throughout the game. So what I want to show you is two different starting deployments that I would probably do on this particular map, Bloody Ridge. One is if I'm going to Echo and Hotel, and one is if I'm going to Foxtrot. And the reason for this is I want to be able to show, I guess, how a starting deployment should change and just differ depending on the terrain. And that's really important too, is being able to analyze your terrain and understanding what would be going here, what would be going here, and what you can be likely to expect. Now, if you look in the lobby at the start of the game, you might notice your opponents have all armored decks or all airborne decks or something crazy like that. And so you obviously need to adjust accordingly based on maybe where you think the airborne deck might go, for example, or just the threat of having an airborne deck and knowing that they could be rushing you here or rushing to Gulf or something. Might even make each player take one more AA piece in their starting deployment than they might normally do. And so I guess a little bit of map knowledge is nice too. You probably know if you play this map often that a lot of people go to the city here between Echo and Gulf, and it's a pretty important area because it's a springboard to contest either Hotel or Echo depending on which area you're coming from. And so a lot of people will heliborne assault that with helicopter infantry. They'll bring AA choppers. And so because of that, I like to bring Avengers here because they're fast moving. They're pretty good AA, though they are short range. They'll really, just because of how fast they fire, how many missiles they have, they'll make pretty short work of helicopters if you can get away with it. If you can get away with getting them close, that is. And also, recon's very important, so I take a recon chopper in pretty much any deployment. In this case, I just want a Kiowa because it's got very good optics and it's also cheap. And then, let's see, probably take 4 to 6 squads of Marines. I want these guys to contest the city here. Might want them to flank, and Marines and the LVTPs, which have grenade launchers, they're very powerful, very good at neutralizing enemy infantry. And if your enemy attacks you with all sappers with flamethrowers or something, you can actually fight them in the city reasonably well with your LVTPs. Don't be afraid to send these into a city if they don't have good AT there, because they're pretty durable. Certainly they'll survive weak enemy infantry and they'll be able to suppress them with their grenade launcher. Very effective. Another thing to consider is tanks, and I think heavy tanks are really one of the more important units in the game, and I think a lot of people don't give them enough credit. But especially with the DLC changes and the patch changes, I really think that they will take a more center role in the game, even than they have up till now. And so in my Dex tanks, I have 3 tanks. I have the M1A2, the M1A1HC, and the M1IP Abrams. And these are my 2 heavy tanks. I feel having at least one of these is important just because they have the ability to damage an enemy heavy. So if the enemy starts with a T-72BU and all you have are M1IPs, you're going to kind of get screwed. And you don't want to have that happen. And since the choice between these is only 20 points, I say go with the best, go with the M1IP. But have go with the M1A2, I should say, but have an M1IP ready to support if necessary. Might also start with a Chaparral just to have more longer range anti-helicopter ability. A mortar, I love mortars just for smoking, very good starting choice. And then the rest of these points are kind of floating. Do I want to have light riflemen and Blackhawks to go and contest the zone? Get here quicker maybe and fire on enemies coming in, or do I want Stingers or even a Cobra helicopter? I might take a Cobra just because a lot of people underestimate their autocannon, and if your enemy's coming in with a bunch of transport helicopters and setting down right here in this field to go into the city, a Cobra up here can just rocket them all down and kill them really quickly. It's not a very big investment, but it does allow you a lot of potential to mess up an enemy's start depending on what it is. Likewise, if it's a bunch of fast-moving transports moving down this road, you can rocket them as well. So that's kind of a nice tactical flexibility. And so yeah, that would be my opening deployment, more or less, for Hotel and Echo, just in a general game. You can see a little bit up closer. Got Avengers, LVTPs with Marines, 6 infantry squads, 2 tanks, 1 is a super heavy, mortars for smoke, Cobra helicopter, recon. And the strategy here is really to get your infantry into the town, but don't just go for the town. I feel that's kind of a mistake. I think it's always better to flank around the town in either direction with your tanks and maybe a little bit of infantry and just hold them up in the town, because if you can get back here and neutralize the enemy's AA assets or just their supporting units, and then meanwhile he's sitting here with a bunch of infantry in the town that really can't go anywhere just because when they're only foot mobile, they don't really have much mobility. So you can really choke off the town and win the zone that way rather than being bogged down in a city to city or a street to street fighting in the town, which the US deck isn't really good at. They don't have flamethrower infantry. They don't really have very good brawlers other than their Marines, especially not this deck. So the US deck with a lot of decks, that would be kind of my strategy. So now I'm going to cancel all these units. I want to show you a deployment coming from What's that zone? Coming from Kilo and going into Foxtrot. So when you look at Foxtrot, it's actually a lot more open than this area over here, which has a big city and tree lines. Obviously, Foxtrot has trees and it has little forests, but in general, there's these big open fields with clean lines of sight once you get to the hedgerows or the trees or whatever. And so for that area, I might go a little bit heavier on tanks. So, my trusty M1A2, probably a couple M1 IPs. I think maybe risk an M1H. So let's see if I have enough points to keep up or to maintain that. I might have to cancel it and get something else. My two Avengers, again, I think they're very useful. They're actually really good anti-plane AA if something flies past them like a bomber or a jet. With two of them, you'll almost always get a guaranteed kill. Chaparral just for long-range helicopter suppression. If you have a Chaparral, they basically can't use helicopters just because it's so long-range. And a couple Bradleys, actually. I think Bradleys just to support the tanks, give ATGM fire, pretty important. Obviously, forgot to put it down, but a CV and a FOB. Now, the dilemma is that I don't have enough points for recon. So what I can do is cancel one of my cheaper tanks and get a Kiowa recon, and then maybe a Marine squad, maybe a Humvee Tow 2 to just provide more fire support. Though I think I'd rather have a Bradley for that price. Now the other option is if you want to cancel your M1HC, put the IP back, and then you're only 25 points away from a Hornet. That might be a good choice. After 20 seconds or so, by the time you get to Foxtrot, you'll have enough for the Hornet, and you can use it as a good surprise attack when your enemy's heavies show up. And I also want to point out that I start all my units really close to the road here, really close to the edge of the zone. That's pretty important because first thing you should do is fast move down the road whenever you start the game, and the closer you are to the edge of the zone, the closer all your units are to the road, the quicker they'll get on the road, the quicker they'll be off in whatever direction they're going. Also notice I put the Kiowa here over the trees. I want to show you, if you start it just like on the ground there, see he starts just, he's inert, but if you start him over the trees, he starts up actually high and in the air, so his rotor blades will be spinning. He'll actually be able to take off quicker because he's already in the air, he's already active, whereas if he's on the ground, he'll have to rev up the engine and get up into the air and then take off. So whenever you use helicopters in an opening deployment, you really want to put them as close to the edge of the deployment zone as you can, yeah, but you also want to put them over trees so they start in the air. And I think that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about today. I do want to give an example of how to actually start, and so we'll just say I launch the battle. First thing you do is you select everything and you fast move just as one blob. And then you give individual commands. Don't sit in the zone and pick one thing and send it up, pick another thing. You send it all at once, and then click your helicopter and hotkey it to whatever you like. Click your mortar, hotkey it to whatever you like. And then you might start giving individual commands. I only want my M1A2 to go there. He's in reserve. M1IP will have him take the tree line there. The HC as well. Oh, I have two M1IPs. Both M1IPs there. Buy my Hornet. Or maybe if I see a napalm bomber or a bunch of planes, I'll buy an interceptor. It's kind of good having those points floating, but I'll say I have a Hornet. Mortar's ready. Maybe I'll start smoking to protect my advance, because I know he's going to come down this road, so if I put smoke here, it really disrupts him. Except he doesn't want to put his smoke down. Really? There he goes. A little embarrassing. Putting smoke down. Make sure your Kiowa stays in the air. Keep him safe. Spread the Avengers out. Normally you wouldn't have your Hornet this far up, but you should more be back here circling, ready to pounce in on any heavy tanks you see. Tanks moving up. Bradleys, you'll want to get them up here, take the forest, unload your infantry, and then have your Bradleys support your tanks. So I hope this video kind of shows a little contrast between what you might take in a more urban environment and then in a more open environment, and just how your deployment should differ, and hopefully some of the things you might have to think about when you make your deployment. As always, I really appreciate comments on the video and how I can improve for future tutorials, and also just general feedback. Don't forget to like, subscribe, whatever. And another thing I'm asking for is for people to send me suggestions of other tutorials you might like me to do, subjects you'd like me to cover, and also send me replays. If you have an interesting replay, something you'd like me to look at and maybe give feedback on or cast. I can't promise I'll do all of them, obviously, but if I see a good replay, I would really like to post it and say this is from a viewer and this is what happened, and spend half an hour on it just going through like I have my other casts. If you do that, please PM me on the forums or maybe message my inbox for YouTube and just write a brief paragraph about why the replay is interesting or different highlights, and I'll see what I can do. So anyways, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and this is Raven signing off.